車はじわじわこう動いてますので、気を緩めて便所やら行った日には車も熱ってからえらいことになってしまうという大急ぎの忙しい現場でしたばい。
熟練の技術。
Few things age like fine wine. You have people like George Clooney, Jennifer Aniston, and literally any bottle of wine. And you do also have certain car platforms. And there is without a doubt absolutely no discussion that air-cooled 911s are just absolutely beautiful. It's just like a well-known fact. Not a single person can stand up here and tell me that a Datsun 240Z will not always be just an iconic design that they just keep trying to bring back. And not a breath from an automotive enthusiast can argue that any sort of like old school Ferrari before they started getting really ugly without the Pininfarina design was actually not a perfect car that was designed and just was really unreliable. And if you can pick a clean example up for less than like $1 bajillion, it's pretty good. But a classic on the Japanese tuner side is none other than, I would argue, the S chassis. And they're just properly beautiful. And they make me want to do illegal street activity while blasting some sort of terribly over-bassed music. Except I can't because the good ones are, well, pretty much dead. I'm Alex, Alex.fi on Instagram, and today we're going to be talking about just the history of this platform and exactly what happened to the car that we all know and love. What exactly happened to the S chassis platform? Welcome to Fitment Industries, and if you're looking for wheels, tires, or suspension, be sure to hit us up over at fitmentindustries.com. And of course, don't forget to subscribe so we can keep making videos like this, which is fueled by none other than y'all in the comments. So don't forget to drop a comment on what you'd like to see us talk about next in the next episode of what happened. And if you're interested in learning a little bit more about our full build giveaway that we got going on or our deals that we're running all month long, be sure to check out the website at fitmentindustries.com. There's a lot happening, and it's very important that you stay connected to what's going on. The S chassis, which is commonly related to the Nissan Silvia, began in 1975 with the S10 platform, which featured its own unique chassis. We're already getting into arguments in the first two sentences of what I'm about to say, because the chassis actually started in 75 while the Silvia nameplate began in 1965. The 1965 model shared components with the Datsun Fairlady at the time, which is why some might consider the dawn of the S chassis to begin almost a decade later in 1975, because it was the chassis that was unique, not the nameplate. The original Silvia was a force to be reckoned with, as it was one of the first production sports cars from Nissan that came in under a ton, 2,000 pounds. It was actually really incredible that it was able to do so in the time and era that it was in. And not only that, but it was the first rendition of this Silvia that would be hand-pieced together by a team of Nissan technicians, which did cause the price to be a little bit insane, but also allowed Nissan to vet the idea of an overall lower investment because they didn't need to develop mold designs for the body panels. That's an interesting fact. Back in the day, they just continued to make them slightly different with every single car because it was cheaper than going in and making a mold, which is what Ferrari used to do for a very long time, which is why a lot of times those door cards don't actually align when you buy them for older cars. But what the 65 Silvia did was lay the framework for Nissan to develop a car that was outlandish by nature and focused on lightweight performance. It was pretty much like the Powder Puff Girl recipe for success. It was weight, power, and balance, and how could they actually get all three out of this car? However, for Nissan to make the car great again in the same fashion as the first one was a little bit of like a movie trilogy. Because it was really good at the beginning, it got really weird and kind of terrible in the middle, and enjoyable at the end because it ended. And the only example where that doesn't make sense is the Fast and the Furious franchise, which is rough. The whole thing after 7 is terrible. Well, 5 probably. The late 70s would see the Silvia come back, or the 200SX, and it was terribly received, missing the mark on the powerhouse that dominated at the time, which was the Toyota Celica. The Toyota Celica was a banging car, and nobody was gonna like really argue that. And it was surprising considering Nissan had done so well with their initial Silvia, and one could say it just wasn't really hitting the mark in any way, shape, or form. And that makes really not a lot of sense, but well, it did. But the 70s were an incredible strong time for Datsun. It was an incredible strong time for Toyota, which left the S chassis grandfather without much resources or focus in the market because people just didn't really know that it existed and it lagged behind everything else. So Nissan just thought that they would try it again. The S10, S11, and all the initial Silvia had the same elements of what the S chassis was meant to be: light, connected, and focused. And they're really trying to hammer this home with a progressive design and performance car. But it wasn't really until the S12 where Nissan really started to make a mark in the industry with their tuner Japanese sports car and become a car that people like you and people like me now know, want to buy, make 12 different color panels, and drift around a corner, into a wall, or a fence, depending on if your name is Anna or Sam. Now, special shout out to the S110 and their Super Silhouette model, because that is the car that many would consider to be like the foundational design element of over fenders. The Nissan is one of the founding cornerstones of the Bosuzoku design and the over fender creation, as it spearheaded the aggressive downforce aero and captivated the growing Japanese tuner market. If you've ever seen a Super Silhouette, you know what I'm talking about. A lot of people would say it started with that car. That influence eventually carried over to the United States, and many older enthusiasts would probably actually tell you that a lot of styling that we see on the Japanese cars these days come from that S110 Super Silhouette. Produced from 84 to 1988, the S12 was really starting to kind of hone in what they wanted to do. The Silvia would go into homologation racing, have a beefed up engine, refine its body styling, and finally get to the headlights that we all know and love, like the scrunchies that your mom used to have around your wrist. Now, this is where the S chassis started to grow, but would still get beat. I'm making S chassis owners mad, but really in terms of production and capacity, the AE86 would take the hearts and minds over the S12 at the time. But the S12 would get a turbocharged platform in the States, it would get some sharp looks, and just enough sales for Nissan to give it another run in 1989. The S13 would receive a KA and an SR engine option and all the love. To many, the S13 is the most notorious S chassis platform that bridged professional racing to amateur driving. Without going into too many details, the S13, S14, and S15 were fantastic platforms. Really starting to get some love, and money behind the wheel was really important for Nissan. And sharing common chassis components and structural innovation through balanced suspension, these cars would go on to shatter records with partnerships with HKS and other tuning companies in drag racing, time attack, and overseas drifting. Really, this is where Nissan started to hit some strides with this car, particularly because not of Nissan, but because of people around Nissan that really liked the car. Nissan did an okay job with it, but tuners, they made magic happen. So what made the S chassis so incredible was its ability to be a scalable Lego. And while others can scale power fairly easy, it almost always came at the cost of reliability. And that's likely why, like nowadays, you can go buy off the shelf a 700 horsepower car that can sit in 100-degree traffic with the AC on with cooled seats without thinking twice. That is really hard to actually do, but that mindset was and still is relatively unheard of when you start talking about high horsepower numbers. But nearly 2 decades earlier, people were finding they could do the same with the S chassis with additional power modifications and a lot of other stuff without inherently ruining the reliability of the car. The S14 was taking home dubs in the 300 class JGTC, and the S15 was dominating in its own right. And whether you look at like the red-headed stepchild of the 180SX and everything it brought to the States, everything from the S13 and up blossomed with the growth of tuner cars in the United States and the growing aftermarket support for platforms all over the world. People were starting to pick these cars up, and it never really went away. Until it kind of did. Like, why did it die? It had the SR, for Christ's sake. It was like the engine for everybody back in the early 2000s, and it still is for people nowadays. It was an incredible car, and the car continued to do okay enough in terms of production that it showed the value of a properly developed sports car, but died in the same unfortunate Game of Thrones style Hodor scene, where it happened, you knew it was coming, but it still hurt.
Hold off! Hold off!
It didn't feel good. So why did it fall to the same fate as the RX-7, the 3000 GT VR4, and even, dare I say, the Nissan R34? Segue. One of the primary reasons you saw cars die in the 90s as they entered into the 21st century, specifically in the tuner world, was due to a tightening of internal business models and adjusting currency exchanges. Essentially, money was changing value constantly and not in a good way. International businesses had reached a peak of competition as they entered into the 21st century. Import and export business had begun to creep in cost, which ate at margins, specifically in raw materials and vehicle production. When you look at the brands like Nissan, like Mitsubishi, like Toyota, and things like that, it really was a tight race to see who could make it out of the 2000s alive. And if you can make $100 potentially making the car legal and bring it into the States and sell 100 of them versus making $1,200 on a Maxima here in the States, Nissan is going to bring the good old Maxima. It's just how it goes. Additionally, your flex into yen versus USD was playing red versus blue, and it was starting to impact Nissan's total competition space in the United States. The more they realized that they could just sell normal, bland, boring cars, the ones that you see on the highway going $110 that have rust all over Maximas, that was what was selling. Additionally, outdated emission policies and increased safety needs caused a gap in legally importable vehicles. With the Nissan S chassis cars like the S13 through the S15 and its US counterparts, the struggle to maintain the platform and its supply chain for its relatively small sales numbers just didn't make sense. And because USA was continuing to elevate its emission standards and importation regulations, Nissan just really didn't want to do it. And if you know anything about Nissan's business model, they make questionable decisions all the time. But they just saw it as an opportunity to reconsolidate its entire platform lineup and that it was going into and focused as it moved towards into 2001 and forward. Nissan has done a lot of really questionable, just sharing that with you, do what you want with that information. While we get close to the import law allowing this beautiful car to be owned like people like you and people like me, it will be interesting to see if people snag them up for the premium price they are likely to go for, because they're probably gonna be like $50,000 for a poopy one, okay? One specific mention about S-chassis cars, though, that the other cars during the same time frame faced was that it could have been successful had the company been willing to take slightly more moderate risk. There was a lot of companies that could have come through the 2000s with a win, and a lot of domestic cars and their rise to fame in the early 2000s was because the Japanese companies didn't want to take the risk. The Nissan name during the late 90s and early 2000s were likely the strongest it had ever been, with its platforms being known as the standard of tunable sports cars. It was the industry standard. And the S-chassis ended not because they had to, but it was because they wanted to, which is a much different story when you look at something equivalent to a 3000 GT VR4, which was essentially just over-engineered into the grave. But what do you think? Will the S-chassis cars become legal, or ones already here continue to be overhyped and overpriced? Or are they worth it? Let us know in the comment section below. And of course, if you're looking for wheels, tires, or suspension, be sure to check us out over at fitmentindustries.com. Of course, we got a lot going on, so at least check out the website, scroll through the pages, see if something interests you. I'm Alex from Fitment Industries. We will see you later. Peace.